Hi, everyone. My name is Sana Sayed. Welcome to the Mammogram Equity and Justice Seminar. I'm very happy to see that we have so many people attending. I just want to let everyone know that we are recording this session just to disseminate the event afterwards. And I will briefly introduce our guest speaker in a few minutes, Zara Khan, but let me just start by giving an overview of the health equity effort that American Muslim health professionals has started, and just to briefly introduce myself as well. So my name is Sana Sayed. I am the Health Policy and Advocacy Director for American Muslim Health Professionals. I'm on their board, and I generally work in the health policy space. Recently, American Muslim Health Professionals has also started to focus on health equity. And to this end, we are just starting off with the Health Equity Network Alliance, in which we are collaborating with other medical and racial justice organizations. Imana is one of the organizations that we are working with, and also Campaign Against Racism, which is a part of Equal Health, is also facilitating some of our efforts. And today's seminar is actually one of the initial outputs from that new alliance that we've created. And the focus and vision behind our health equity effort is to reassess the healthcare systems and medical practice, and to identify and advocate for evidence-based use of race in diagnostic and treatment models that impact the equitable healthcare access, care, and delivery. So sometimes that translates into showcasing the need of racial differences within certain guidelines, which we will be discussing to some extent today. And in some cases, it turns into the misuse of race within certain algorithms. And that is also something that this health equity initiative that American Muslim health professionals started will be looking at as well in a critical way. And we are working with medical professionals, physicians across the country to make sure that we support informed and scientific efforts in this regard. And yes, so with that, I wanted to, of course, our sort of initial event that we are having is this Mammogram Equity and Justice Seminar. And with that, I'm very pleased to introduce our guest speaker, Zara Khan. She is an executive director for strategic planning, healthcare finance, education, and policy. She's a very strong advocate for racial health equity, particularly for minority women. And Zara has focused her efforts primarily on mammogram equity. She focuses also on the difference between a breast cancer dodger and a breast cancer survivor. And this remains like an integral part of Zara's message and advocacy efforts. And she will, of course, speak to this in further detail during her discussion today. Please stay on mute, and of course, towards the end, we will have time for questions as well. And with that, I hand it to you, Zara.
Thank you so much, Sana, for inviting me here today. It's a pleasure to be part of this effort, especially as a person from a Muslim perspective. I think our community will really benefit from the awareness that we build on mammogram equity and justice. On that note, I hope that we help spread the awareness, not just through women, but also through men in our community, as advocates need to work unitedly together on this very important issue. I have also very recently published an article on the systemic racism in Mammogram Guidelines, and as a result, I presented at the Hawaii Radiological Society and the American College of Radiology's Women in Diversity initiative. And I wanted to share with all of you some of my comments at that particular event. I'm wearing a lei for my Hawaii spirit. Even though I live on the East Coast, they had sent me a little lei to wear in honor of the Hawaiian efforts. And incidentally, Hawaii is our most diverse state in the United States. It has a 37% Asian population. So it's very interesting to see how those breast cancer patterns present themselves, because what I'm really focusing on our efforts today is two things. One is the annual mammogram for women in the 40s, and two, a look at the starting age requirements that might be different by race groups. And so let's take a look at the presentation I wanted to share from you back on whoops, my technological skills here. Share this.
Yes, it's fine.
Yep. Okay, good. All right. Aloha, everyone. Thanks so much for. So before I start that, is the sound and everything good? Okay. Joining me on this webinar focused on mammogram disparities. I hope everyone has been keeping safe during these difficult times. I also want to especially thank Dr. Scott Grosskreutz, President of the Hawaii Radiological Society, his entire team, and the ACR Commission for Women and Diversity for inviting me to speak today about my personal mammogram screening journey, my work on mammogram equity, and a review of the flawed U.S. Preventive Services Task Force Mammogram Guidelines. These guidelines suggesting that all average-risk women begin screening at age 50.
Hello?
Racially disadvantaged minorities, Blacks, Asians, and Hispanics, whose breast cancer diagnoses typically peak much earlier in the 40s. And so by ignoring critical race data for minorities, these guidelines create a deep injustice for these ethnic groups. All the references and data that I'm discussing today can be found in my most recent article, Systemic Racism in Mammogram Guidelines, published in Think Global Health. And all this to say, I'm truly honored to be here with you today, healthy and well, thanks to annual screenings in the 40s. 2018, though, for me was a completely different story. Shortly after the new year, most of my resolutions turned into background noise as I focused instead on prayer. Well, where am I on this?
All right, there you can share. You're sharing your screen right now.
Okay. We are often in energetic roles as moms. Try this again here. Aloha, everyone. Is that good? Thanks so much for joining me on this webinar focused on. Are we good again?
Yes, we are. You can go a little bit forward if you want, because we did hear most of this.
Yes. Okay. So let's go here.
All right. Excellent.
2018, though, for me was a completely different story. Shortly after the new year, most of my resolutions turned into background noise as I focused instead on prayer while undergoing several tests and reviewing concerning results stemming from an abnormal routine mammogram screening. My family was shaken. My younger daughter, just a middle schooler in 8th grade, and my older teenager home from college, slept with me every night for the first few days, worried that our expected lifetime together was becoming very uncertain. And my husband of almost 22 years not only showered me with the utmost love and care, but also being a physician, helped me navigate difficult choices with compassion and dignity. Because after all, a woman in her 40s deserves every chance to make choices that allow her to live life to the fullest, a quality life to the fullest. We are often in energetic roles as moms, wives, workers, and community members. We're not elderly. We're in the midst of our lives, often with dependent children. Consequently, my family will always remember the start of 2018 as the time Mom thankfully dodged breast cancer. However, to this day, I'm deeply haunted by how close I came to making the wrong decision that year, and how it would have deprived me of that chance to become a breast cancer dodger. During my annual physical, my PCP had tried to explain to me that for a woman in her 40s with no family history, no lifestyle risk factors, no palpable lump, and a clear mammogram the year before, there was absolutely no reason for me to get a mammogram done again, especially since the new US Task Force guidelines recommend that women like myself should wait several years until age 50 to even begin screening. And yet, feeling on the fence with this advice, I'm really glad that at the end, I decided to act on a strong inner premonition, an indication which I felt needed for me to have a mammogram one more time at least. And so my PCP ultimately deferred to my wish, and I had a 3D mammogram, which produces even better detection in dense breast tissue, which is often present in 40% of women, particularly slim ones like myself who have not yet gone through menopause. And then a few weeks later, my family, friends, and community were shocked when I shared my stage 0 precancer diagnosis. Visible only as a tiny microscopic scratch on a screen. And a comparison to my prior year mammogram confirmed that this was definitely a new development. Unlike true cancers, stages 1 through 4, at stage 0, abnormal precancer cells have no developmental capacity to move or invade into surrounding tissue yet. So the timing of this catch was crucial. And one good outcome of sharing my very private results was that many of my acquaintances went immediately their own mammogram screenings. Suddenly, I was a case in point for all of them about why leading cancer institutions like MD Anderson and Sloan Memorial Kettering, along with organizations like the American Society of Breast Surgeons and the ACR, all recommend mammograms start at age 40 and continue annually because new abnormal tissue changes can often occur in just 1 year. And because stage 0 is a precancer, this stage is not reflected in true invasive breast cancer stats. Breast cancer, which is stages 1 through 4. And those statistics remind us that actually a jarring 1 in 6 true breast cancers occurs in the 40s. 1 in 8 women gets afflicted in her lifetime, and a 75% majority have no family history or any high risk factors whatsoever. In my case, I went for a 28 gene panel test, and everything came back normal. So it's really important to remember that the vast majority of people do not have family history and do not have high risk factors. And yet stage 0 remains perhaps the most important early diagnosis opportunity, offering women the unique chance to dodge stages 1 through 4 invasive breast cancer entirely, with the least harsh treatment options, including surgical routes that do not require subsequent chemotherapy, radiation, or long-term daily drug usage. Never before had I been so relieved to achieve a 0 on a test. And thanks to annual mammogram screenings, I'm truly lucky to identify and count myself as someone who is a breast cancer dodger rather than a breast cancer survivor. And then, of course, I had to make sense of this journey. I had to ask, how could someone in her 40s with no family history, no lifestyle risk factors, and a clear mammogram just the year before even be diagnosed with a precancer? I wondered if my outcome was not an uncommon one. And if so, how could the task force have revised their guidelines to encourage all average risk women to wait till they turn 50 to start screenings, and to even start those just biannually, knowing that abnormal tissue changes often do occur in just 1 year. So annual mammograms are important. And what were the cost and policy implications here. Seeking answers, I turned to the areas that I have trained in best: data, finance, and policy. And in parsing through websites, testimonials, research papers, and archived government documents, I found myself uncovering a much deeper message that needs to be shared and articulated from a racial injustice perspective. And that is that the task force guidelines to start mammograms at age 50 are racially unjust because they disproportionately disadvantage minority women in their 40s. According to a major Harvard study, unlike white women whose breast cancer diagnoses typically peaks in the 60s, breast cancer diagnoses amongst Black, Asian, and Hispanic women peaks in the 40s. And so to begin mammogram screening at age 50 is just far too late for these racial groups. I created a visual graphic to explain this simply. And it shows that a start at 50 US Preventive Services Task Force Mammogram Guideline approach leaves minorities behind. It's also important to remember that a significant 23% of all white women's breast cancers are diagnosed in the 40s. So the new guidelines approach just does not make sense. It not only devalues women during the midst of their lives, but is racially unjust because it fails to account for ethnic differences in age-related breast cancer data. And yet the task force, in pushing for its start at 50 case, has used fallacious arguments by misapplying four key concepts. And these are worth looking at together: overdiagnosis, false positives, mortality, and cost. So, first of all, the task force places far too much emphasis on overdiagnosis, a concept which creates this uplifting notion that treatment may not be needed for all cancers, since autopsies do occasionally discover previously unknown asymptomatic breast cancers that would have never affected a person's life otherwise. And while this may be very true for a slow-growing cancer in a really elderly person nearing the end of her life expectancy, it is totally irresponsible to suggest that precancers and cancers can be left untreated in the 40s because of overdiagnosis, since breast cancers in younger women often tend to be more aggressive. Therefore, overdiagnosis is a completely hollow argument in the 40s, and missing a potentially aggressive malignancy can have devastating life expectancy consequences for this age group. Secondly, the task force uses an argument of false positives, a term referring to suspected lesions in mammograms that subsequently prove to be benign upon further testing. The task force identifies false positives as a principal harm, implying that mammograms are somewhat dangerous and not valuable because they could be wrong. And yet, interestingly, in reality, 87% of all mammogram findings are accurate. Additionally, 3D mammograms have a 40% better detection rate than even regular mammograms, making them really useful, as I'd mentioned before, for women in their 40s who may have dense breast tissue. And then thirdly, by primarily emphasizing mortality data, the task force guidelines lose focus on critical quality of life improvements possible by catching an abnormality early enough at stage 0 to dodge harsher treatments, disfiguring surgeries, and debilitating side effects that chronically overwhelm patients, both emotionally and physically. You don't need to be a scientist to understand that catching an abnormality at stage 1 versus stage 4 will have vastly different quality of life implications. After all, two women at different stages of cancer could theoretically live equally long lives, but at what quality of life cost to them? Arguably, a woman who is diagnosed at an earlier stage and undergoes short, easier treatments can move on and enjoy a high-quality life like her peers, compared to a peer who has lived just as long but endured years of debilitating, harsher treatments for a later stage cancer catch. So for minorities, the new delayed screening approach not only means getting diagnosed later at a more advanced stage, but also means potentially enduring a far lower quality of life while alive. And lastly, but perhaps most importantly, the task force claims that its final recommendations were made without cost considerations. And yet, until recently, their website mentioned that in a final modeling report intended to help clinicians, employers, and policymakers, 20 strategies were compared to select the most efficient approach. And a new intervention was deemed more efficient if it resulted in gains in health outcomes while consuming fewer resources or costs. This content has recently been removed from its website. However, the original cost intent can still be uncovered by reviewing a published U.S. Preventive Services Task Force recommendation statement, which reiterates that the most efficient screening strategies were actually informed using a CISNET study. And then if you go to that CISNET study, that explains that 20 different strategies were explored, and again, only those that improved health outcomes while consuming fewer resources or costs were deemed efficient. So that word efficient there is being used very carefully, and costs were definitely considered in the detailed planning. And what this means for minorities is that if the task force guidelines become approved law, the new Start at 50 mammogram screening approach would allow insurance companies to potentially no longer provide annual mammogram screenings at age 40 as part of preventive care. And this would create an enormous conflict of interest, an enormous conflict of health interests, because eliminating screening benefits in the 40s would not only raise the out-of-pocket costs shouldered by ethnic patients whose breast cancer diagnosis peaks in the 40s, but also would then discourage them because of the expense to get the screenings when they need them the most. Consequently, for all these reasons we just discussed, annual mammogram literacy amongst minorities is really crucial so that women in their 40s are not blindsided by the task force screening recommendations, and so that they can have more informed discussions with their own physicians about real health choices. Based on my own advocacy efforts through minority seminars, I found that only a concerning 48% of attendees realized that malignant tissue changes can occur in just 1 year in a healthy person. And after my seminar, I'm glad that 83% of them understood the importance of an annual mammogram for a healthy person with no family history. And most importantly, 97% of them felt it was crucial for them, for minorities, for women, to have a chance to get diagnosed early at stage 0 pre-cancer, to dodge stage 1 invasive cancer. Minorities deserve that equal opportunity to be diagnosed as early as possible. And yet, the task force patronizingly emphasizes that diagnostic testing induces anxiety. And yes, going through the testing that I did was stressful, but the task force neglects to explain that this anxiety and stress is fairly minimal compared to the subsequent stress that would be endured by ignoring an area that turns out to be a precancer or cancer. Minority women in the 40s cannot be pacified through ignorance and deserve every opportunity to treat their disease at the earliest. As a South Asian woman who was not high risk, I shudder at the thought of how badly my family would have suffered had I waited several years till age 50 for my next mammogram. Thankfully, I did not. And I have been able to enjoy life, a quality life, as a result. I have been blessed to raise my daughters, watch my younger one graduate from middle school that year, and start high school. I enjoyed buying her the promised puppy she wanted for so long after we went through everything we did as a family. And I enjoyed my older one's college graduation and start of medical school. And last week, I celebrated a milestone anniversary with my husband. As for 2018, looking back, even though it had started off with its challenges, it also counts as one of my favorite years because I felt so grateful for having dodged a really serious health crisis. And of course, my family went to celebrate to Hawaii. And being there, celebrating my recovery, we snorkeled, hiked, and swam with the manta rays. Participating in such lively activities is what being an energetic woman in her 40s is often all about. I'm so thankful that I'm actually here at a conference hosted by the Hawaii Radiological Society, because Hawaii will always be very special to me. Ultimately, when we learn together, we do better for each other and for our communities. I leave you with a few key points. Annual mammograms in the 40s are especially critical for minorities whose breast cancer diagnosis peaks in the 40s. So women should not be confused by the new unjust task force guidelines that blanketly ask all average risk women to wait till age 50 to begin screening. We should also remember that 23% of all white women's breast cancers are also diagnosed in the 40s. And together, we need to advocate for annual screenings and their access for all women as part of our preventive care in the 40s, so that our mothers, our wives, our daughters, our women might have the same chance that I did. The chance to become a breast cancer dodger rather than a breast cancer survivor. Thank you so much for having me here today. Mahalo. Aloha, everyone. Thanks so much for joining me on this webinar focused on mammogram disparities.
Hi, Zara, you're back on, I think.
Hi, do you see me? Let me see.
You may have to turn on the camera. There you go.
Assalamu alaikum. So I wanted to share that. For one thing, as you guys saw, it takes a lot of emotional courage to get through all of that material when you're talking about it from a journey in which you personally learned all these lessons and found mammogram equity and justice to be a major issue for all of us to share and learn. Wanted to move to some international perspectives here. And again, please excuse my technological skills, but hopefully I'm going to do a better job this time. Did that share?
Yes.
Okay. So wanted to of course review that one of the things that I hope everybody got out of this is that mammograms can, how do I expand this here?
We can see it though. I think you do play. Yeah.
Yeah, here we go. So mammograms can, of course, detect an abnormality that is precancer. It's stage 0, and they can detect an issue before a lump is felt. I feel like that's really important for people to understand because so many people are focused on a lump, and I wanted to remind everyone there was no lump in my case. So a mammogram can really provide something that early. The other thing that I often hear from folks is that, oh my, but there's radiation involved. But we have to keep some perspective here. So you should never subject yourself to unnecessary radiation, but you should also weigh the benefit and the cost of radiation. And we go for simple things like x-rays and dental x-rays. And so people need to understand that mammogram x-rays are also very small doses. For a Harvard study, just 0.4 MSV, which is a measure of radiation. And as I explained, a typical chest x-ray generates about 0.1 MSV, which creates a 1 in a million chance of getting cancer from a chest x-ray, about the same tiny chance of getting cancer from toxins in peanut butter we eat. So we need to keep that in perspective, because the alternative is that if someone misses an early precancer or gets breast cancer, there is a whole lot more radiation involved. You will have a whole lot more treatment involved. So compared to that, this is a very small dose for most people, something to discuss with your physicians, but on the whole, it's a great benefit to be able to go for mammograms annually, especially in the 40s. And trying to get to my next slide here. Okay. And so breast cancer incidence in the 40s substantially increases and continues to increase within that decade. It's almost twice as much as the breast cancer incidence in the 35 to 39 age group. And regular mammography has been shown to cut breast cancer deaths by 1/3 for women in the ages of 40 and above. And the years of life lost to breast cancer are still the highest for women in their 40s. And it really impacts minorities quite disproportionately, because for Blacks, Hispanics, Asians, again, breast cancer peaks in the 40s. So that's when you miss your annual mammogram. It's also important to look at this from an international perspective, because in the United States, we are such a mix of different cultures, especially in the Muslim community. We, mashallah, make up the most diverse community in this country. And so it's important to look at ethnicity and heritage a little bit to understand how breast cancer might be impacting different racial groups. And we do know that breast cancer is the leading cause of death amongst women from all developing countries. And in the younger age groups, it tends to be very aggressive. So early detection in the 40s, as we have emphasized, is really important. I want to look for us together at a couple of different countries. And one of the reasons I also want to do this is that certain countries in the United States are considered white. So the US Census data definition of white includes just about everyone who's not Asian, African, and Hispanic, Asian, Black, and Hispanic. And white is defined as everybody to the west of Pakistan, and basically includes Turkish women, Iranian women, Central Asian women, Middle Eastern women, all North African women. So regardless of how these groups view themselves, the US Census data definition for them is that they're all considered white. However, 23% of white folks, also in the United States, are diagnosed in the 40s. Their peaks are in the 40s. So it's begging the question that is that 23% maybe driven by some of these ethnicities that are considered white by the census data, but really have very different race patterns. So in Egypt, an extensive study was done, and it was found that women were typically diagnosed an entire decade before those in the West. And again, most women were premenopausal. And again, the premenopausal is so important because at that time, these cancers tend to be more aggressive. In Turkey, a very good study was done, and I'm really proud of Turkey for rallying around the starting age, because after their study discovered that in Turkey, 47% of all cases were occurring in people who were under 50. So in Turkey, 40 and under made up 47% of all breast cancer cases. And as a result, they changed their screening age from 50 to 40. In Turkey, it's also interesting that 1 in 6 breast cancers occurs in the 30s and younger age group. So it was really important for them to do their own study and to come up with a new screening age. Saudi Arabia has done its own extensive studying, which is very commendable, and they discovered the same thing, that based on their reviews, the incidence of breast cancer is highest in the 40s. So it's very appropriate to start screening in the 40s. And mammograms in Saudi Arabia are free, which is great because these are quite expensive in different regions and become a bit cost prohibitive for lower developing countries. And yet in Saudi Arabia, because of modesty issues, 92% of women have never had a mammogram. And now the question that I hope everyone's asking, the highest incident, which country has the highest incidence of breast cancer in all of Asia? And the answer is Pakistan, which is also an area of my heritage. Pakistan has the highest rate of breast cancer compared to any other Asian country. 1 in 9 women in Pakistan are expected to have a lifetime risk of getting breast cancer. And their diagnosis peaks, according to a major study, in the 30s and 40s. And sadly, most of the diagnoses occur already at stage 1 or stage 2. And even though mammograms are expensive, healthcare is not as accessible, there isn't a major national registry that's collecting great data. At the same time, medical experts are seeing that women who could have been diagnosed earlier or would have had access to mammography just aren't making use of these facilities because of cultural taboos. And it's so important to remember that these cultural taboos that are prevalent in the Muslim community are ones that we need to also change in order to help ourselves. We need to get away from the idea that just because the word is breast and cancer, that these two words invoke terror and fear and shame. We need to get away from these ideologies because we have a religious obligation to take care of our health and inshallah for our families. And we need to remember that annual mammograms are saving lives and are most affecting minorities, that we have the most to lose if we do not improve our abilities as a community to learn about this issue. Interestingly, every time I have a breast cancer awareness seminar, it takes effort to bring the community together to listen on this sensitive topic. And I don't have this issue in other communities. So we really need to work together to change attitudes. A number of people will think, based on cultural ideologies, that perhaps a person who got breast cancer got an evil eye or got jinxed. And all of these taboos need to be broken, which is why I really advocate that men and women, everybody needs to learn together, and we need to work together to move forward on this disease, because it will blindside our women the most. So we have the most to gain by learning together on this issue. And finally, I want to show this slide one more time to conclude. Mammogram inequity right now in the United States, if we as a community don't speak up, we as a community don't use our voices to speak against mammogram inequity and justice, we're going to lose. Because for us, in Blacks, Asians, Hispanics, for minorities, our breast cancer peaks in the 40s. So if the USPSTF recommendations become law, which they haven't because of lobby groups that every 2 years are trying to hold these guidelines back from becoming law. And once they do, we will lose preventive screenings in our 40s. So this is very, very important, because for our communities, our women will need this the most. And then I have some references here also for you folks who really want to get into the details and learn from these sources. So let me throw it back to you, Sana.
Sure. Thank you, Zara. Thank you so much for that very, very insightful talk and personal experience. That was wonderful. I would just make one comment that Zara was speaking about cultural issues, and I know that this is a pervasive phenomenon that goes beyond just the Muslim community. We see it in a lot of ethnic minorities in the US where there's cultural reservations to the same words that you're using, breast, and then suddenly it turns off, right? So this is a rather cross-cultural phenomenon that we see, and of course we're more familiar with our own societies, but we recognize that this crosses a lot of boundaries, and so it is something to learn from. And your experience can be extrapolated across different ethnicities, and the underlying message about how these guidelines are being created by ignoring the data from so many groups that do not represent the majority perspective is leading to a lot of harm to those women. So recognizing that and understanding how there's personal responsibility and there's responsibility for those who are supposed to be taking care of us at the same time. So thank you so much. And I would like to open it up for questions as well. We got one very nice comment from Sonia Ahmed, and I think she had to leave, but she was applauding you and your courage in fighting this diagnosis and spreading awareness, and was really saluting your voice and bringing awareness to this cause. So I don't know if there's any questions. I'll pause for now from the audience as well. You can unmute yourself or provide questions in the chat, however you're comfortable.
Assalamu alaikum. I am Rifat. I just want to commend Zara for an excellent presentation and wish her continued, good health. Just want to give a background on what is this USPSTF for the people who may not be aware. If most people are physicians, they would know. So conventionally, we were always doing mammograms starting at the age of 40s. But recently, just for cost saving, they had a task force and they have come up with these new recommendations, which of course, most of the physicians don't agree with either, but they come under pressure because of the insurance reimbursements as well by the hospitals. And even physicians are now confused what to do, whether to start at 40 or 50. So thank you for a very strong voice. May more people hear you and do the right thing.
I'm so honored to hear Dr. Rifat Chaudhry and the fact that she has joined this Mammogram Disparities webinar. One of the things I'm truly proud of is my faith. And I am really proud to be a Muslim. And it gives me great strength to know that my faith asks women to be the best they can be, to live healthy. There are no taboos in my faith. And so when I'm talking about taboos, I'm talking about cultural taboos that have developed over time that are actually taking us away from our religious obligation to stay healthy and to stay well. And so it really frustrates me when we have so many Muslims in different cultures that the culture has overtaken this wonderful faith-based obligation to be healthy and to be open about learning. And I love Dr. Chaudhry, who I've seen at another seminar of mine, because she not only embodies the best of Muslim values, she's very well spoken and really is encouraging people to learn on this issue also. Thank you so much, Dr. Chaudhry.
If there are any other questions or comments or thoughts in addition to what has been said, or other experiences that folks would want to share from their work with different communities, we are a small group, so there's no need to feel. Right. I don't think that there are any questions. Zara, just very quickly, in your own personal story, obviously you had a close call and you had an excellent outcome. You will continue with the screening guideline that is suitable for you. Have you been able to get yourself the right care that you need moving forward as well?
Yes, Alhamdulillah, I am really doing well. So this was almost 2.5 years ago. And again, I have to credit my faith for the fact that I even went for another mammogram that year, because I've written about this, that I had a clear mammogram the prior year. My physician didn't really have a strong sense of what guideline to follow, and actually recommended that I just wait till age 50 before I go again. And so, who wants to go for another medical test unless you feel like it's needed or necessary? And I really wasn't planning on going that year for my mammogram again. And the only reason I went is, I always say my prayers on a daily basis, and it's truly God's grace that I kept getting in a dream, go for your mammogram, to the point it was so specific that I had a dream that said, there's something on your left side, and a mammogram screen was flashing, like a computer monitor mammogram screen was flashing before me. So it spooked me out. And I insisted on a mammogram that time. There was no lump, nothing anyone could feel. My PCP thought I was a little wacky wanting to get one when she was advising me against one. And then it's so interesting. The catch was exactly as in my dream. It was on the left side, and it was so small, and it was the only catch. So it was the earliest stage 0 catch possible. One of the issues with stage 0 even is that it can be a more progressed stage 0, in which case your treatment options will change. For me, it was like the only stage 0, one single spot that was found. So even in stage 0, getting an early diagnosis, the earliest possible diagnosis, is important. Since there aren't a lot of, and I'll switch a little bit into the legislative side. I think it's really important for legislative efforts to address mammogram equity by focusing on the optimal physical and emotional quality of life improvement possible by the earliest detection. And I think the words that I just used are really important, because the way the USPSTF angles this issue, it really just treats us as a statistic. Will we have mortality? Will we escape stages 4 or 3? But that's not the issue. We want to move the needle towards the earliest detection so that women can, like myself, dodge breast cancer entirely and move forward without the cloud of any recurrence. I have, with God's grace, been caught at a point where my future recurrence rate is virtually 0. So it's really helpful for all of us to get caught at the earliest stage. And in terms of equity legislation going forward, in Hawaii also, I've been recommending to them, and they are beginning to incorporate some of this, is to put in language that reflects that it's not just about mortality. Yes, mortality is important, but it's also about physical and emotional quality of life optimization possible by the earliest detection.
Thank you, Zara. That was great. And I feel like your final messages carried a lot of weight. I think this particular context of what exactly is the USPSTF, the Preventive Task Force, trying to achieve. Are they really focused on the well-being of the person, or moving their numbers around to create the sense of security and cost efficiency as they are looking for? So that is a very important context, that there are people involved in healthcare, so you cannot not treat the numbers. And I would say, like, as you speak about your faith, it's interesting to hear, and I think there is also value there, because a lot of people think that their faith is the one that is preventing them from accessing that care, that those taboos that you speak of. And it's not just in our community, it is communities across and other religious beliefs as well, that they also have cultural nuances that influence them as opposed to their religious beliefs. Because of course, in any religion, they do expect you to live healthy, they do expect you to take care of yourself. So that is a good way to message it. I think this is where sometimes people lose out, like public health and scientists and physicians even push more for, oh, forget about your faith and focus on your health, when in fact the message is that you think about your faith, it actually wants you to be healthy, right? So that is a very good message. I think we received one more comment from Miriam as well, and she was also just thanking you and sharing her own experience, that she has been going for mammograms but had not heard of the new guideline. um, and yes, I will be emailing the webinar to all of the registrants, those who've attended and otherwise as well. So with that, I don't think that there are any other questions, so we can close the event. And thank you so much, Zara, for joining and sharing such a personal experience. And thank you to everyone who joined us this very, very late evening. And folks are thanking you as they head out. And yes, I will email everyone with the full recording as well. And so sorry about the initial mishaps. You know how it is these days with everyone shifting online. Thank you.
Jazakallah, thank you for having me. And it was a pleasure to be here. And Alhamdulillah, I'm so glad I was able to share everything with our community, and look forward to Allah guiding us so that we continue to make strides. Assalamu alaikum.
Bye.
Bye-bye.